but I don't know why it says that. But along with Sushabji, if this room kicks you out for some reason, just come back and call me if anything. All right, the recording has started.
Right.
Stervey, welcome to the session. First thing first, thank you for making your time. I know we had a back and forth discussion about arranging your schedule,
Yep.
which is very busy, and you finally agreed and managed today, weekend, Sunday. So I'm very glad and grateful for your time and arrangement. So thank you for that. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to week 2 of Sustainability Literacy, organized by TBC Sustainability Unit in association with UN Global Compact Network Nepal. We had a wonderful week 1. We had a lot of discussion. I felt that week 1 actually ended up with some questions and confusions about the trade-offs, crisis paradoxes, and lot of questions on whether we are able to actually save the world or not. And for me as an academic, I think we're heading to the good direction. Any kind of uncomfortability and tough questions are the one that needs the attention and demands the time for the discussion, and I think we're doing that. On that note, we are at week 2. The very first session of week 2 is by Mr. Stervey Lim. Mr. Lim is a distinguished thought leader, advisor, and transformative coach with over 30 years of experience guiding senior executives, business owners, and organizations across Asia. He's renowned for his expertise in EQ leadership, ESG sustainability, and agile growth. Stervey has empowered countless leaders to navigate complex challenges and drive lasting positive change. Like I said, all the details of the profile of the resource person are already listed on the website, so request you to go through that. The main the question that we're asking in today's session, when we had a discussion, was how is the ESG practice it gets aligned with the national priorities, and what does that even mean? For example, last week we had a few discussion about where does Nepal government stand in terms of climate action, climate adaptation, climate policies, and etc. And a lot of us were questioning about the implementation status of those actions. And again, in terms of Nepal, we have so many questions when it comes to the priorities. So it would be actually good to hear the cases and examples, like I said earlier, in Singapore, and how the corporate sector actually, looks into the national priorities, and how the government of Singapore conveys the message of their national priorities to the corporate sector, and how do they come together when it comes to ESG in practice and climate action and etc. So that would be good to hear. On that, I will pass over the mic to you, Stervey. Please take over.
Thanks, Sunita. Thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And really thank you for all the time and effort getting so early in the morning. I think it's almost 7 plus in Nepal. But yeah, thank you very much. As Sunita mentioned itself, I am actually just a simple practitioner in Singapore itself. We are just basically working towards what our government has directed for us under our Singapore Green Plan. So in today's sharing, what I will do is I will kind of break down some of the aspects of what our government is doing, and then from our side, where we have come from in terms of organizations, in terms of education and advisory, how do we actually get it implemented? And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we kind of look at Singapore as where we have I'd just like to remind the reality is every country do have our own challenges. So in Singapore, we definitely do have our challenges, but we have a discussion of that at the end of this topic itself, right? So let me have a pleasure to share with you the slides itself. Just give me a minute. All right. Great. I guess you guys can see the slides, ESG practitioner. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. So let me just pull out my slides itself. So welcome to this interesting topic called ESG for practitioners, aligned to national priorities itself. So we kind of call ourselves practitioners because there are a lot of different layers in terms of how ESG can be implemented, from a national to the sectoral to the organizations to the people. So basically, we are looking at across some of these aspects itself. And basically where we want to come from is, first of all, I'd like to say good morning to everybody, and thank you for all the learners, the future leaders of Nepal, and also distinguished guests of Nepal itself. It is actually quite a distinct honor for me to kind of share with you basically what Singapore has, but I think more importantly is what are some of the policies are shaping Nepal's sustainability future today, especially for the young generations and the young leaders itself. Now, I feel that as I was preparing this, your presence here today will reflect Nepal's serious commitment for advancing ESG excellence, and what does it mean to learn from the global best practices. And I think it is really a very humble honor and privilege to kind of share with you basically how we can work it out. We have actually educated about 1,000 practitioners outside on our site, with across professors and across practitioners and subject matter expertise, to kind of align their own strategic action plans so that they basically can understand where Singapore national priorities are, and then they actually can implement across that. So it actually goes back to our national level. So we're going to draw from Singapore's ESG transformation journey, a very small nation that has a global sustainable leadership. But in terms of where we are just a regional ESG hub in this part of the world. So what makes Singapore model particularly so relevant to Nepal, I think it's not only just our success, but I think it's the systematic approach to the whole of nation ESG integration that can be adopted, whereby Nepal has a unique federal structure and the development priorities in your own space. So in the next couple of 1 to 2 hours, I'm going to explore how Singapore is going to transform this ESG from compliance burden into a competitive advantage that we have delivered. We have almost did that, and we have generated almost about 10 billion, 10B, all right, in green financing commitment, and also establishing ourselves as also Southeast Asia carbon service hub. So we're going to work into that space and how we actually generate that as part and parcel of our national GDP itself. What are some of the learning objectives for some of you are here from an academic perspective is by the end of this session, we're going to have a discussion, but you should be able to gain, firstly, some comprehensive understanding of what ESG is in terms of a national competitiveness strategy, rather than just as a environmental initiative, as some of us we've been taught to work on. You will see that how ESG integration really drives economic growth. At the same time, you actually attract international investments, and then you enhance the global standing branding itself. So if you kind of understand where I'm coming from, you realize that it is not just implementation, but there's a lot of strategic thinking to push forward in this aspect, especially in terms of competitiveness and branding itself. And then this reason why in Singapore and this part of the world, Singapore, Malaysia, and in Philippines, we are actually endorsing ISSB as one of the framework for reporting, which basically enable investors to look at organizations and how basically that cascade into some of this I've mentioned. So we kind of have this 2 hours, we can talk about that. Secondly, the other learning outcome that you can look at is most probably a very detailed insight of how Singapore as a whole nation of implementation model, our institutional framework that I kind of share a little bit about, policy coordination mechanisms that we have, and how do we have stakeholder engagement strategies. So that basically, so they basically can adopt to the Nepal context itself. And last but not least is a very clear strategic roadmap that actually basically perhaps accelerate Nepal's ESG journey and leveraging on your very ambitious 2045 net zero target basically as a regional ESG leader among the developing nations in your region. So that's where I think we will kind of look at it. So let's begin by examining why ESG become the defining framework for the 21st century as a national competitiveness, and how do we look in terms of forward-thinking nations to leverage a sustainable development advantage. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, as Sunita has mentioned, my name is Stervey. So basically, we'll move on to the next topic itself. Now, before we actually deep dive into main content, let's examine a little bit of the global context to make today's discussion a little bit more strategic in terms of Nepal's future. We would like, these are the 4 topics that I will be covering. The first part, which is basically 2 parts, basically part 1, part 2, we'll talk about Singapore, and part 3, part 4, we'll talk about Nepal. But basically the numbers I'm going to share with you, it's going to review that basically ESG in today's context has become a defining competitive advantage of our time and in most of the nation. And that's why in Singapore, as early movers, we are capturing this what call disproportionate benefits. So currently, comprehensive ESG reporting has already been adopted by almost only 100 companies in 7 countries globally. So while we are all hearing a lot of ESG, a lot of going on is all what we call, it's really up in the air. So out of the 7 countries, only 100 companies have really fully adopted 100% ESG reporting. So this represents actually a first mover advantage for nations who can systematically integrate ESG practices at a scale. And that's the reason why Singapore has already defined by 2027, we're going to have our first ISSB compliance reporting for the first 500 public companies itself. So this is basically a pressure cooker for a lot of public companies in Singapore to deliver it. But the companies have already been given pretty good notification about 2-3 years back. So we actually are already in the works of some of this itself. So by 2027, we're going to have compliance itself. So basically, that means to say that the government is pressing on a very clear mandate to say that we're going to use ISSB reporting framework under your reporting itself. And then after that, you can use other framework. You have the GRI, TCFD, and stuff like that. So this is where I thought it was quite interesting. So Singapore exemplified this opportunity perfectly, whereby in just 2 years, from 2022 to 2024 last year, we actually have increased our ESG integration amongst the company from about less than 50%, about 49%, to about 76%. So if you calculate that, that's almost about an average about 55% increase about corporate adaptation is just 24 months. If you ask me, this is demonstration how rapidly transformation can occur when you have the right national framework. And ISP framework is really meant for investors, all right? And that's the reason why Singapore is very clear that basically this is where we want to look at, where we are very concerned about environment, and we do have our national pillars to work with, but there's nothing like getting investment there, because ladies and gentlemen, Asia, or this part of the world, South Asia and Southeast Asia, we are the last frontier for ESG, which means to say that the Europeans and the Americans they are pretty good in this aspects for where they are coming from, but there's a major opportunity in this part of the world, especially in South Asia and in Southeast Asia for us. So have that as expectation, then you realize that there's actually a lot for us to work with, right? But the government must see this, right? Rather than looking at inwardly, they must be able to expand outwardly. And I'll demonstrate the next an hour how this will actually work for Singapore. That's number 1. Number 2, there is a trillion T, not B, dollar opportunity gap out there. Okay, and this is a critical insight for Nepal, right? See, the global climate finance gap stands at USD 2.4 trillion annually. All right, this is not just a challenge, but this is basically a large capital mobilization opportunity in human history itself. The last time that we saw this was in the IT space in the 1980s, where there was an IT boom, there was a major boom in that space itself. This is going to be the similar aspect in this part of the world, and you all are sitting in this space now. So if can you imagine when governments is able to enable them to see that an opportunity, developing nations like yours and mine that position ourselves as ESG rated destination will capture this what we call this proportionate share of capital, isn't it? And Nepal with the aggressive, ambitious 2040 net zero commitment and I'll call it renewable energy potential, it's definitely uniquely positioned as a significant portion of this investment flow. So think about that. If it's that huge, that's a lot. So which brings me down to the third point, which basically Nepal is actually in a very strategic positioning. Because for Nepal, my perspective on Nepal is your landscape represents an unprecedented strategic opportunities. While most of the developed countries are still building basic awareness, and Nepal can actually leapfrog directly into advancement implementation models itself. The reason is because your federal structure can actually provide advantages that's decentralized or centralized system usually lack. The ability to pilot innovative approaches, the ability at provisional or provincial levels can be successful in terms of implementation. Your renewable energy potential, particularly in terms of hydroelectrics capacity, can position Nepal into not just a carbon neutral country, but it's like almost Bhutan, a net carbon negative nation, an extremely attractive proportion, right? Our proposition for a lot of international climate investors. So in that space, that's a lot that basically I think Nepal has to offer. And then that brings that to the fourth level, which is called the competitive landscape reality. See, what Singapore experience demonstrate is that our ESG leadership creates a cascading competitive advantage whereby we actually enhance access to capital, we get premium marketing positioning, and we attract top-tier talents, whereby we are given a lot of preferential treatment in international partnership. And one of the ways that we are actually doing that is we're actually taking advantage of the Article 6, which is called the carbon credit opportunity. And we are now becoming, we will become a carbon credit trading hub country itself, at least by 2027. And we are not here just on a voluntary basis, excuse me, but we are positioning as a compliance. So we are basically looking at some of these opportunities because Singapore don't have what most of the countries out there have: natural resources and natural landscape. We only have what we call human capital, and our strength is in financial stability. So the competitive advantage landscape in Nepal has a lot more in that space itself. So nations that kind of delay your comprehensive ESG integration don't only just miss the opportunity, but you face a lot of increasing barriers as ESG standard become more a market requisite than a differentiator itself. And then we have seen it a lot of this in terms of our space in Southeast Asia. We are and investors that's coming, investing billions of dollars and millions of dollars, they're asking a lot of organizations in country, please share with us what is your ESG strategy. So this becomes a mandate achieved from the government coming down, whereby there is a certain framework internationally followed, and as ISSB, we are actually following with the European side, right? So basically, there's a lot of advantage, and we can talk about it along this way. So the global landscape explains why Singapore's systematic approach is valuable, right? And let's examine, right, in the next couple of slides, what does it mean? So, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be focusing on part 1 and part 2 on Singapore side just before the break, and then our students can break. So and then after the break, we can kind of I told the liberty to share about what's Nepal landscape opportunities and my personal perspective of strategic recommendation for Nepal itself. So basically, we'll look in that space. All right. So let's start with this fundamental ESG implementation. All right. So As I mean, you guys are quite familiar with ESG. So, having established the global agency and Singapore kind of ESG leadership in our space, I'd like to take this couple of 45 minutes kind of examine the comprehensive framework that we have, that we can transform ESG from a regular compliance that is supposed to be the positioning to a more strategic competitive advantage, right? So now what's distinguished us is just not only understanding that the environmental, the social, or the governance, as all we know that is called ESG, it's not just an isolated checkbox that the government is trying to push for, but it's all about interconnectivity or interconnected pillars at a national competitive level. So our government basically, our experience basically demonstrates that ESG excellence requires a more holistic, whereby environment sustainability drives economic innovation, social inclusion drives resilience of community, and a strong governance enable long-term strategic planning. So this integrated approach is what transforms ESG from what we call a normal cost center that we all are being called most of the time to a more value creator itself. And then once we are able to do that, that means to say there's a lot of paradigm mind shift of not only just the leaders and on the men on the policy level, but all the leaders at the corporate level itself. Because without this tool, having the formation on top, the workforce on the ground have no idea what's going to happen. So it's actually a catch-22 situation most of the time. And what I kind of painted a very nice picture with it, we are still going through a lot that changes itself, because it is a workforce that require us to transform ESG into helping Mother Earth. Well, I was telling most of my practitioners and learners that, you know what, it's not Mother Earth that we need to save, as we always say, oh, let's save Mother Earth. It's not true. Mother Earth don't need to be saved. Mother Earth can continue how she has been around for billions of years. It is us that we need to save ourselves so that we can save Mother Earth. So if you understand that perspective, there's a lot of us that need to put in a lot of effort to move forward, and it's a journey that we are looking for. So in this aspect, I've actually broken down in terms of explanation of environmental, the social, and the governance, and the last point of integration of how this works. So let's talk about the first point, the environmental pillar, right? The environmental pillar that Singapore does is three critical dimensions that Nepal can also leverage on into strategy. Is number one, a climate action that represents visible opportunity. See, I always bring back to Nepal's commitment to net zero 2045 positioning, because you guys are really aggressive in that, and you are definitely ahead in some of the most developing initiatives around. But the true advantage lies in terms of the implementation, right? So the Singapore experience that we had shows that aggressive climate targets, when properly executed, do attract premium international investors, and they do create first mover advantage, especially in the clean technology sectors itself. For us, when we have our 2030 goals, whereby we're going to reduce 35% of a national carbon footprint, that's almost a 60 million ton of carbon footprint by 2030 under Paris Agreement. We also push another level called by 2035 plan, we will reduce another 45 million tons of carbon footprint, which basically only Japan and Singapore signed with Paris Agreement. I bet it's the United Nations itself. And then that's not because we just want to be branded there, but because of all this aggressive initiative from the government, when it's being pushed down, there is a lot of mechanism on the ground that needs to be done. And one of the things that we'll talk about is called carbon tax, right? We have a discussion on it. But have this understanding that climate action do represent a visible opportunities. And as mentioned earlier, in Nepal, you do have a lot of resources to look at it. So resource efficiency becomes a competitive differentiator, right? Because in an increasing resource constrained world that we are now having, and there's so much social, political, financial, and happening around, everybody is now reversing this collaboration mindset into a little bit nationalistic mindset itself. So think about this. Nepal has a lot of abundant water resources. So when managed through advanced efficiency framework, which along the way, if you guys can implement, can become both economic assets and a regional competitive advantage itself. And then, and that brings back to where we Singapore has transformed our water scarcity into technological leadership. We don't have water resources. We only have our famous Marina Bay that's being built by our father nation LKY as a visionary to say that it's a catchment area. Other than that, we don't have anything. So what Singapore did is we actually have to tap on basically our existing resources internally on a recycle level. At the same time, we built the world's largest reverse osmosis in Singapore, which basically America has to come over and learn from us, and they got to bring it back to America to do that. Not that we are good at, but because we learn how to improve along the way. So this water scarcity is national security itself. So Nepal can actually transform water abundance into sustainable prosperity, if that's another perspective we can look at. Then another way of looking at it is also biodiversity conservation itself. If you ask me, the biodiversity offers unique opportunity for Nepal, right? Because your extraordinary biodiversity, especially from Himalayas to the Tiras, represent a national or natural capital that basically, when valued and managed properly, do generate a lot of economic returns through carbon credits, ecotourism, and even bioeconomic development itself. We don't have that opportunity in Singapore, but we are working with a lot of professors and academics in terms of the biodiversity, in terms whereby one of our government agencies, NEA, they actually doing a lot of biomass and reverse and bioreversal and biosequential carbon resequential from that level. So in this aspect, I think there's a lot we can actually work hand in hand in that sense. Now, if I move into the social pillar itself, you realize that a social pillar creates what we call a human capital foundation. And this is very critical in terms of long-term competitiveness. So what we did is, one of the things that we did is inclusive development. This is basically to ensure that ESG transformation benefits every segment of the society. So Singapore model demonstrate that inclusive growth, right, isn't just about ethically important. It is economically essential. It is a very broad-based prosperity that creates a larger domestic market. It reduces social tensions, but it's also built a little bit of social cohesion, right, to basically sustain the economic transformation. So it is a policies and a trust that easily said than done, because as you know, every organizations will have their own perspective of how things are run. And as you know, in all Asian companies, there is a lot of challenges to bring in inclusivity and DEI and stuff like that. But this is where our government is still pushing that. And as I mentioned earlier, we just celebrate our National Day yesterday. I think the government realized that, and all our national messages in terms of our national celebration is talking about inclusiveness in terms of compassion, kindness, and empathy. I think that's where organizations and countries are now realizing that you need people to support this. All right. The next one we actually talk about is our human rights. All right. Our human rights framework, when robustly implemented well, you actually create a very predictable business environment. And that a lot attracts your international investments and partnership, because a strong human rights protects the signal of institutional maturity itself. Your human rights are not what we see most of the time in the US or some of this where they have strikes and everything. Our human rights is basically understanding where we could stand as where we be, our self rights to work as either a leader or as a workforce itself, right? Because it kind of reduces your political risk premiums that investors are trying to invest inside. So if there's any of these unnecessary things that's happening and unnecessary demonstration and strike, it is not going to be very, 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 very attractive, right? So our government basically has not have a very major issue on that, but they're trying to educate the leaders to now taking care of the workforce, because the workforce now is under major stress in terms of many aspects. As you all know, the workforce into this context, they are all under BANI or BANENI. So basically, they are all psychologically stressed, and that's where there's a lot of help needed to balance that itself. And then the last part is your community impact. Basically, what we are looking at is how to ensure that development benefits local communities, and this basically creates social licensing, large-scale projects, and builds grassroots and continuous advancement. One of these things that that I kind of liked with the not all the Singapore companies does it, trust me, but some of the Singapore companies actually are doing this, whereby I'm not too sure you heard about our Bayan Tree. A Bayan Tree is actually a local spa and luxurious hotel where we have, and the management is very ESG in this aspect, whereby they actually what we call endorse this social aspect, whereby when they actually open up their spa and hotel across ASEAN, here in Thailand, in Indonesia, what they did is they actually are setting up a whole community itself, whereby the whole of the establishment is run by the locals, right? Of course, the leaders are all coming from Singapore to do the management itself, but the spa, masseuse, the product production, and the product sourcing is all localized. It creates that community impact in that sense, and I felt that there was something which is commendable, because out of so many companies itself, I would say there's a couple of them are doing this, but the success is unbelievable, all right? Because sooner or later, you and I, we are very aware of what ESG is, and you want to support that aspect, even though a little bit more expensive, but you think it's worth that to kind of save us, to save Mother Earth, right? So if you think it in the perspective, it makes sense. So that's the social part that I can kind of share with you from a competitive advantage or strategy advantage than just compliance, right? The last part is governance. Strong governance is basically enabling infrastructure, and strong governance create institutional foundation that kind of enables ESG excellence, right? So one of the things that we are trying to push for is always transparency in government operations and corporate practices that reduces transactional costs, attracts investments, international investment, and build a public trust, essential for long-term policies implementation. Singapore is in a way well known for transparent governance model, and that's the fundamental in terms of our ability to attract premium capital and partnership itself. And how transparent this could be is where in 2022, Singapore actually endorsed a act called the SPP, whereby the Stewardship Protection Act, whereby investors into the company, they have the right to question every ESG strategy and every ESG spending of the invested company they put into. And that's how the government wants it to be as transparent as possible, which means to say is that while the investors, it could be a financial institution investors, or it can be an overseas investor from JV or any of the family investors, they put the money inside there, they will have the right to ask every single about anything about the financials and the ESG perspective itself. So that's giving a lot of challenge to a lot of people, but that's how we want to run it, because at the end of the day, it has to be for the better of the ESG of the organization itself. So accountability mechanism, right, is where you ensure ESG commitment, and it can translate into measurable outcomes. If you ask me, the question here is, how do you define that accountability, and how do you define the outcomes? So this is where a lot of discussion has been actually going around for every single country. But if you understand the whole concept, it actually builds credibility between international partners and creates a lot of internal pressure for continuous improvement. Because at the end of the day, we want to have an organization or the country in order to deliver that into that governance level, right? And Singapore, as you know, we are pretty strong in our governance, as in like we are pretty transparent. We want to become giving it the institutional strength to enable policy implementation across the political cycles, providing long-term investment itself. So that's how we actually move from compliance into a little bit of strategic advantage in many aspects. And if I kind of put everything into a national priority, the transformation power of ESG lies in the integration of the national development priorities. So in Singapore, we do have our national development priorities, and basically based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So basically, Nepal do have yourself, right? So there's actually not much differentiation in some of this. And this is not about adding ESG requirement to existing development plans at all. It's about reimagining development through the ESG lenses. So for Nepal, this could mean aligning your 5-year plans into ESG framework and ensuring that infrastructure investments meets the environmental standards, social inclusion goals, and at the same time, governance excellence simultaneously. All right, this integrated approach creates synergies that is accelerate both development outcomes and ESG performance itself. So this is the kind of a bit of comprehensive framework that we can really look at, and actually we provide the foundation that Singapore has. But the critical question becomes this: how do we translate framework that into an actionable implementation strategies that do deliver tangible results? So this is always which I always ask all the practitioners that we train to have that in organization level, because in national level we do have our pillars we actually work with, all right? But when it goes and it flows down, you realize there will be always a gap of communication at every single level, because every single level leaders have their own motives, agendas, and basically intentions. So it gets to be filtered along the way. So instead of just top down from the government level itself, it has to also be bottoms up, whereby basically in the center, they will have to meet half somewhere. So I always ask the question as we move forward into ESG space and helping Mother Earth along the way to help us, how do we transform or translate the framework, a national framework, into an actionable implementation strategies all the time? Right. So basically, this is where I think if you talk about that itself, it will bring you that strategic advantage. Now, based on that, let's move on to the next slide, which basically it shows how basically it kind of evolved to where we have today. I'm going to share with you how we're going to run this access into national capital when you are able to be competitive itself. What does it mean in terms when you're compliant? And I'll give you a broader picture before we go into our Singapore national implementation level. So as you kind of all know, environmental social governance has evolved beyond a corporate nice to have today. I mean, every single country and every single company that is on a corporate level or on a public level in every country, there now stands to be a strategic pillar to drive national competitiveness, shaping participation into the global economy. Singapore started this when we have a carbon taxation in 2019, and then that's where our organization, public companies, now have been impacted, and they have been doing that since then. And the government realized that it's not easy to implement, so they actually pushed the compliance reporting in 2027. Our friendly neighborhood, which is basically our neighbor Malaysia, they're going to start the carbon taxation in 2026, my apologies. And in 2026, and it is because for the past couple of years, Malaysia needs to understand how the Singapore are secure, because we are the first in this part of the world to have carbon tax after we kind of agree with United Nations how to run the Article 6. And our carbon taxation is not to tax the company for sake of taxing, but we have a very strategic decision making, whereby basically at the end of the day, we want to be the main only trading country in this part of the world or trading hub for carbon credit, because you don't have any resources like most of the countries like yourself. All right, you only have basically workforce, human capital, and finance stability. So basically, our governments are quite forward looking in that sense, right? But having said that, they are able to then define their national competitiveness by pushing the right buttons to ensure the local organizations or the local public companies must align to where they are looking forward itself. So first, in order to access international capital in ESG compliant investment, it's where everybody is looking, how do I draw down? All right, there's a ESG funding of almost like 2.7 trillion of sustainability bonds and they have been like searching like crazy for the last few years, about almost fivefolds in terms of opportunity out there. Institutional investors are increasing, requiring companies and indeed in the higher jurisdiction to demonstrate you have credible ESG commitment itself. And then think about it, whereby while the Donald Trump administrations are pushing away sustainability itself, we do have a lot of US very, very compassionate and very ESG sustainable investors in this part of the world. One of few of them is BlackRock. And BlackRock has invested billions of dollars in Singapore through Sembcorp, which is basically one of our national semi-government itself. And they have invested $2 billion into Malaysia, all right, through the same expectation. And then the reason why is because we demonstrated that we can push and we can deliver our ESG commitment itself. So this expectation is not only intensifying now, but it's also a more capital chase of sustainability and impact outcome of the both public and the private market itself. So if we want to attract foreign capitals at the lowest possible cost as possible, the nation must understand that there must be a strong performance has now become a table stakes in terms of what it is. So if you kind of ask me, I'm besides Singapore, I do have organizations in Malaysia, and in Malaysia we are actually doing the same thing. We actually train and we actually educate both the governance and the public listed companies how to basically enable that. And it's interesting to see that basically when organizations have delivered their ESG performance in terms of reporting and in terms of either ISSB or GRI that's well defined in the national level, there was $1 billion actually came in this year for Malaysia. Because Malaysia this year take the helm or they take the lead in terms of ASEAN Council as a lead itself. And Prime Minister Anwar has done an excellent job in that sense. So I mean, I'm talking about that because while I'm from Singapore itself, we do work very closely on our level with a lot of other nations itself, just to ensure that everybody is aligned. So international capitalism is where I think that's where organizations and governments are looking for, but to get the act together, right? To know how to do reporting first in a compliance, but more strategic end level, right? Rather than just compliance and tick on the box and say, I done really right. So that's where we need to come from. And secondly, in terms of the foreign direct investment flow, it is really shaped by really what I mentioned, our sustainability credentials. I mean, studies have shown countries and companies with effective ESG framework and transparent disclosure are more attractive to global investors itself. And having a robust ESG regulation and a good governance and effective policies do attract as a magnet in terms of the green FDI, which is called a foreign direct investment. And they are basically looking at this in terms of the environmental sustainable activities from the foreign investment contributing to the climate, the environmental goals, to ensure that you don't have a negative impact. So this could be investments into renewable energy, cleaner technologies, projects that mitigate climate change and resource depletion itself. So the green FDI is where most of our countries in this part of Southeast Asia, we are all garnering with. So as a result, Singapore now are able to declare that by 2035, every single car is on EV. And guys, I mean, if you ask me, personally, I don't think EV is very green, right? But there's a better approach to before the next new technology, either hydro or nuclear comes on board. But this is where it kind of enabled the whole nation to understand that I got to go green. So the government has instilled that by 2035, every single car in Singapore is EV. We really have transformed about 80% of our public transport, basically our buses and our taxis and our drivers are all on EV cars already. So this is where all the FDIs are all coming from. right? We're establishing one of the biggest CCUS carbon capture in Jurong Island. Jurong Island is full of oil refineries, and we are the biggest oil refinery country in the world. I mean, not the oil, but we refine all the oil, and our Jurong Island is the biggest itself, and we have the biggest, one of the largest CCUS in this part of the world. So this is all coming from there, and renewable energy is where Nepal has opportunity from the hydro to solar itself. In Singapore, we don't have space, so we only have solar panel, and I will talk about how we actually enable that itself. All right, so it is for multinational companies and institutional investors where they will be using ESG as a marker to offer lower reputation and operational risk itself. If you understand this itself, then we want to encourage a lot of organizations in Singapore. Most of our MNCs, most of our large organizations, we actually align that with the global expectation that we need to position as a preferred destination for sustainable investment. Malaysia has done it very well this year. They have like billions of dollars invested into JB, Johor, which is basically south of Malaysia, and that's where they have a major zone that collaboration between Singapore and Johor. We call it Johor zone itself, and we are putting a lot of renewable energy and renewable stuff. And the China president Xi Jinping came into Malaysia, and after that, the next day there were billions of dollars invested into Johor. Suddenly, you see Mr. Donald Trump decided to come to our ASEAN Council meeting in October for whatever reason, but that kind of stuff does attract. So when we are able to understand our sustainability credentials, you are able to have all this coming. But when you have all this opportunity open up, you actually have an organization or the country driving job creation, having major knowledge transfer, and an overall economic resilience itself. Right? It's not just a individual sectors doing it. The government has to orchestrate, whereby it is on a national level by different industries itself. And then that's where we felt that while the government is pushing very hard on the 5 pillars, but they actually allowing a lot of private limited companies to do what they need to do, especially expansion externally itself. Right, so basically, this is where I think it has the competitive driver itself, right? The third one basically is called the export market access, and it's going to be increasingly dependent on ESG compliance. All right, so I'm going to go back into compliance. Like regulations like EU taxonomy, and the corporate sustainability directive, the CSRD. With supply chain due diligence are now having a prerequisite for exporting into major market, into European unions and North America, and now with next year they're going to start a carbon tax for CBAM. The requirement to ensure that we overcome that is where local taxation becomes important. So that's why Singapore started our carbon tax here, and next year Malaysia started that. So these frameworks look not only at environmental impact, but also the social and governance practices, right, across the whole supply chain itself. Now, companies that are based here must report the product and the operations are aligned to foreign ESG standards or the risk exclusion from lucrative markets itself. So many of our companies in Singapore, we actually have a lot of multinational companies from Europe and China, and Europe, China, and America coming in. So basically, we are ESG compliance in that new. So our ESG compliance now is our new passport to global trade itself. I mean, forget about the tariff trade stuff that the Donald Trump administration having it. But think about it this way. All right. When Donald Trump administration decided to pull away from the overall United Nations initiative itself, all right, which ex-president Biden actually was supporting it. There was a major impact on the overall aspect of the European side. But interestingly, all right, the Chinese, all right, and using the strategy of the Sun Tzu Pinfa, all right, basically they went in and said that, look, we will support you by opening up our ESG standard in alignment with Europe ISSB. So what it means, ladies and gentlemen, now that between China and ISSB framework, they are actually coming to a standard that we are all looking at and we can actually cross-reference. Japan is using ISSB now, and now they are looking at ability to see how that cross-reference. In this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, we are already executing ISSB itself. All right. So imagine when you have this export market access in terms of using this as a compliance. Now, if I understand you have ISSB there, I have ISSB standard, and whether is it ISSB, GRI ISSB, or wherever your country ISSB, I can now look at it as terms of opportunity to assess and see whether I need to invest itself. So from a national level, all right, our government is looking forward ahead that when you need a global access, and then we do need each other along the way with so many things as VUCA that's coming up, enabling us to sit in this, especially on the supply chain and compliance, becomes very important. So if you understand some of this aspect, you realize that there is a lot more engagement that basically on a national level we all can work with. And of course, finally, it is about ESG is an essential tool for risk mitigation. All right, because by embedding climate, social, and governance risk management into the policies and enterprises, you actually actively guard against regulatory fines, supply chain disruptions, loss of market access, or you actually proactively guard what you call the damage itself, right? So on the flip side, right, when you have a very effective ESG risk management, you can unlock basically opportunities, foster innovations internally and externally, build greater resilience internally and externally. And when ESG is integrated in the core strategy and risk governance, you are not just avoid some downside risk that you're going to face in the future, but you're going to position yourself to seize what we call the competitive advantage of systemicity which brings. And if you ask me, that's a long call, and that's a lot huge paradigm shift to a lot of leaders. And then why I say that's a long call? Because while we understand this is up in Singapore, practically there are still a lot of organization leaders are not seeing this aspect. Even the government understand is pushing it down, but on the ground, a lot of leaders have their own thinking and they have their own perspective itself. So there will be a lot of major disruption in terms of enabling this itself, which is basically not only just Nepal, trust me, right? Everywhere in the world is facing. Because when we do Singapore, we face a lot of business owners saying that Malaysia is the same thing, so is Philippines, and so is Vietnam. And this causes a lot of confusion because they are not aware what's the advantage of it. So a lot of education, a lot of awareness needs to put inside this new leaders, because these new leaders are all the old fixed mindset guys. Sorry, guys. Just a little bit authentic for a while. Old fixed mindset means to say that most of them are all coming from the pre-COVID era, right? And once you pass the post-COVID era, the 2022, the old generation still believe that they can do what they do before that. But when you cross COVID itself, you just have a totally level playing field of business and opportunities out there. So whatever we've done before 2022 actually doesn't really make sense in many aspects, especially in terms of strategic engagement for business. But a lot of leaders don't feel that they are at a loss. So as a result, you'll see a lot of challenges for most organizations if they are not able to understand the requirement of the shift itself. And honestly, to me, I think that's what's needed, because you need to have some old guards to leave. So that basically, I need all the new generation leaders to come in, because it is about us. It's about saving us and understand why we need to do what we can to minimize the 2 degrees by 2030, which is totally impossible, because we're already hitting 1.7 now. And see what we can do from an organization and national level. So this is where in Singapore, the government is now encouraging a lot of associations, a lot of education to kind of enable this to go on the ground for all the business leaders itself. So in summary for this slide, ladies and gentlemen, all I can say that ESG is no longer just an optional reporting exercise. All right. it is going to be our core source of value. And it is going to be a requirement for accessing global capital and trade, because it is going to be a very powerful lever to manage risk and drive sustainable, inclusive growth itself, right? Because if you kind of look at it, then you realize that from a national level, it's not going to be fun, right? If you let's say we are not in alignment to some of this, and by 2030, when we all come together itself, there will be some major gap in between. And as in all humans, we only work with the group of people who is aligned on top. So there'll be a lot of struggle right at the bottom itself. So this is where, in this part of the world, we are not at that yet, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because remember I said we are at the final frontier of ESG. So it's you all, as in you and I, we have the abundance of opportunity right under our feet. Only thing is, how many of us are willing to take the effort and keep digging for the next 3 feet before we reach the goal itself? And then this is where a lot of stakeholders and a lot of organizations do not see that, because we are being trained to have an immediate so-called results most of the time. So let's see how ESG is moving forward. Now, so I'm going to bring you from this aspect of a national competitive driver. I'm going to bring you into our implementation level in that perspective, right? So in this space itself, we talk about policy level, we talk about institution, sectorial, and project. Excuse me. So on a policy level, I think ESG begins as a national policy framework, and it's a standard to set the tone and the sustainable economic development. So in Singapore, we do have our Singapore Green Plan 2030, which I'll share with you what it is after in part 2. And then we have our own Carbon Pricing Act, which I'll also share with you how we do that. And it is also a mandatory reporting for the public listed company under the ISSB, which is basically now we're actually having all this implemented. Now, all this national policies establish a minimum compliance requirement. That means you need to report your emission standard. You must follow our standard of reporting called ISSB first. And if you want to report, because ISSB is meant for investors, right? So if we want to support and report about our government's, our environmental, then you can use a GRI, or if you have a requirement with your corporate back to US or Europe, then you can use your TCFD. And then if I want to do compliance and I want to do verification and validation, I will be using the ISO standard. Basically, that's how we are pulling the strings to basically get our organization incentivized to go beyond compliance itself. Because the policy level framework creates a consistent environment for the private sectors to run. And it kind of drives a lot of sectorial alignment, right? Such as our energy, our waste, our water. And for us is to support our Singapore climate goals, right? And then at the same time, when we are doing internally, we also want to demonstrate branding, right? Competitive advantage. We want to have our international agreement, whereby with Paris Agreement, we're doing, which basically Nepal is doing the same. So there is a lot of similarity in that sense. And basically, our national ESG strategy is very aligned to, or it's also a signal market direction to attract sustainable investments, right? To foster innovation for green sectors. We are expecting almost about 100,000 jobs to be created in the green sector in 2030. Malaysia is expected to have about 300,000 jobs to be created in the green sector by 2030 itself. So there's a lot emphasis on this. Right. So if let's say the organizations sees there's a lot of opportunity and the government is pushing a lot of fundings into this, and they are attracting, and in order to do this, they cannot be the government funding, right? They need to attract the investors who come in, right? So basically the capacity of the human knowledge or knowledge transfer needs to increase. But beside that, material assessment and double material concepts becomes a tool to determine which policy requires and how significant impact business operations and stakeholders' expectation can be done. So Those days we talk about how to be strategic and how do we run it itself. But in today's concept, the leaders must now understand how to do material assessment and double material concepts in a way that it actually helps them to deliver a more sustainable, a more cost-effective way of business. Because it's no longer just looking your ROI and you're looking at within a year itself, but with systemic retail, you are talking about ESG moving in the next 3 to 5 years. You need to have the stakeholders, as in the business leaders and the management, to expand to look beyond 3 years to the 5 years. And that's where a lot of challenges in every country have. Because our overall ASEAN, all right, our over Asia, Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia, Pan Asia, we call ourselves, our thoughts is always never long term. It's always very, very short term. I mean, as again, guys, I'm just being authentic. So if that's the case, what does it mean at the end of the day? In order to have this, so a lot of challenges and a lot of educations we do all face, right? So like I said, while we do have a lot of nice stuff, but on the ground, there's still a lot of challenges to ensure, especially for the business owners, which I think every country faces it. That's the policy level. Now, once you have the national policy level, that basically our government has really set up very nicely, we move into the institutional level, which basically we are talking about the government agencies, the financial institutions that we're looking at. And the institution needs to interpret and operationalize our national framework. So in Singapore, we do have our NEA, our EDB, our EAM. NEA is basically our National Environmental Agency. EMA is our Energy Market Authority. Our MAS is our Monetary Authority itself, Singapore. It's kind of like they took that framework, they actually established and monitor regulations, they offer guidelines, and they run capacity building programs to encourage compliance and best practices. So our carbon taxation that we actually started in 2019, and we're going to move into compliance reporting by 2027. What happens is the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, is also working with our ACRA. ACRA is our agency that does all the registration of the company. I'm not too sure what you call it in Nepal, but ACRA basically has every single company's details of where you stay, who you are, what you do, and how much you earn, and basically which sector you are. So once this compliance goes into that level of reporting by 2027 for all the public listed companies, we are suspecting and expecting this will roll down to the national level of of the large organization and the medium-sized organization. They will be taxed along the way. All right, and it's not because it's going back to the government as we always think it is. This whole taxation is a market-based, whereby this tax from all these large organizations, right, will be put into our ESG funding, and they will be generating innovations and fundings and grants for the next batch of trenches of support and stuff like that. So this is where it gets interesting. It's actually a self-funding opportunity there, right? So this is how we run it, and Malaysia is actually following suit since from next year with their government taxation in 2016, because they already started having their compliance reporting of ISSB S2 starting next year or so. So a lot of things you find that there will be an alignment, and then once this aligned and organizations felt that they can look at it, and government levels feels they can look at it on Article 6 for carbon trading, there will be a lot more opportunities out there in the future to engage with one another. So at the government agency level, this is all happening. So that's government agency level. The financial institution will then evaluate your ESG risks and opportunities in lending, investment, and underwriting decisions. So they're going to integrate all the ESG criteria into the risk management framework, and we're going to look at investment products and then reporting standard itself. For example, our Singapore MAS promotes a lot of green finance, and they require the banks and the asset managers, right, to consider what is the ESG risk and the disclosure of the portfolios. Then they can align on an ongoing regional and the international sustainability finance initiative. So basically, we actually are carrying this out in that perspective. And it's not only just ourselves that executing. The Malaysians Securities Commodities Commissioners, they also are doing the same thing as what we are doing itself. So you realize that there's a increasingly coordinated movement among our countries to kind of shift the requirement to go into green financing. And ladies and gentlemen, green financing is the next thing. Remember, I kind of share with you there are $1 trillion out there. Every country will want to see how they want to capture that. But they can't capture that unless they understand how to do the reporting well, because it's all about ESG. So it all boils back to having the national level of reporting framework. So Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Philippines, we are all very aligned in terms of ISSB itself, and we are actually executing that already. So if you understand that perspective, then you realize that there is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun, right, to do it. But having said that, the banks are now under heavy pressure because the banks need to pass the stress test of 3 levels before they can give you the loan. And currently, unfortunately, while I kind of paint a lot of nice pictures out there, most of the bankers are now facing it because most of the organizations are asking for bank loans, they do not pass all the stress tests. But the government says, hey guys, we're going to have investors from overseas, let's do it. You know, it's not the banks are now under a catch-22 situation. So this is where the government realized it's not a bank issue. They need to go back to the ground level and get the companies, right, to basically report in compliance to ISSB itself. So we actually are pushing a lot of ISSB reporting and training and education out there. And in order to make sure that there's no hanky-panky and you don't do any funny itself, we put an ISO 4064 down there. So basically it's all compliance and validated and verified. So imagine this is a Nepal learn from us. You guys are all the future leaders, right? You guys were basically able to see how to move forward with this space, right? Because what we are doing here is we are in the midst of managing it, right? So what we are doing it, our new generation of leaders basically is like most of you are from university itself or college itself. They are looking at how they can move forward with this, and what they are understanding how to do environmental, how to do their passion itself. What does it mean in terms of helping the country to move in the next level? So this is how powerful when every nation, citizens understand this. Now I'm going to move from the institution down to the sectorial side. So in this sectorial, it goes break into that different level. And each sectorial tailors every ESG approach to its own material risks, opportunities, regulatory framework. For example, in the energy sector, right, this means adoption of renewable energy, renewable power. This means to look at grid decarbonization. This look at how to get energy efficiency audits done up in that sense, right? In Singapore, we are very strong in manufacturing. So for the manufacturing side, the sectoral initiative will involve waste minimization because we do have a lot of waste from basically e-waste to production waste to water waste. And what is the circular economy that's coming up from us so that we don't get our overall landfill that's now almost filled, right, to the rim itself because it causes too much methane. We also have an issue. All right, and all the way to the supplies audit, so that basically the supply who gives all the product raw materials coming into Singapore, basically they are all ESG itself. Right. So all this transparent chemical management has a major difference, right? And this is where it gets interesting. We don't have an agriculture sector, but agriculture sector in most countries, they actually focus on sustainable farming practices, the regeneration of land use, or how to get biodiversity targets itself. So our professors in Singapore, we actually do work with Malaysia, in Thailand, and Indonesia for some of this. We actually get most of the professors from them to come and share with us. We do have our local professors also to kind of work with them itself. So that basically there's enough understanding across level, right? And then in terms of services, which we in Singapore, we are actually pretty strong in, that includes our finance, our real estate, our tourism. This is where we are pushing to have more responsible business practices, community engagement, and transparency in terms of reporting. So one of the things in terms of the, we call it the tourism, our Singapore Tourism Board, STB, we are adopting what we call a GSDC framework itself. So GSDC framework is really meant for all the hotelers and the travel agents and I can't remember who else is there inside to kind of within this framework do their best practices using SDG goals itself, right? It's good to have because that gives the organization or company to say that I must have a GSTC first before I can get into the business to do eco-sustainability business, right? But I always caution all of them, please understand that the government needs you to report ISSB also. So the ISSB is our national framework. So you do have a sectoral framework, you also have a national framework. So this is where sometimes people get confused because they say, hey, I thought you had told me I can do GSTC and that's it. But on a national level, no, you have to do your ISSB. So you have to do reporting. Then, of course, then you have the challenges of setting expectation or what you have, right? So in order to do sectoral standards that most of the organizations now are very comfortable, they actually are using your GRI to do reporting, which is great because, for example, if I'm not mistaken, if I can remember what I learned, GRI 13 is for agriculture, all right? So the GRESB for the real estate, and these are all very aligned in terms of framework itself. But that's only meant for the GRI. So if I want to report to ISSB, then I need to know ISSB and I need to go for the SASB industry standard, which is 73 different industry that I can take KPIs from to measure it. Then I can take a GRI on top. So sectoral seems to be the best practices and collaboration to see how you can actually balance that itself, right? And that's where we all get to learn from one another. Seriously, I get to learn a lot from the subject matter experts when they attend our program, because these guys are from oil and gas, they are from manufacturing, they come from pharmaceutical, they are from agriculture, which I have no idea what it is, but we learned from there because they need to implement frameworks anyway. So basically, that's where we come from. Okay, the last one that we actually can look at is going to be on a national level, project level, sorry. So project level is where we talk about investment decision, procurement, and operations. So on a project level, the ESG principles guide your individual investments and operation decision of the organization. So sustainable procurement evaluates your supplier's performance. So if some of you are very familiar, you're talking about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, right? Down the road, you're going to have scope 4, right? So if you understand the scope 3 itself, right, then you're going to incorporate some of the ESG clauses into the contracts so that basically you see alignment, but both basically on a national level, institution level, and the project level itself. When you get the operation changes that involve maybe upgrading your equipment, then so apply green certification like what we have done in our BCA, our building council for all the builders itself, our agency for building. They need a green certifications, right? We need to track carbon intensity for key projects. How to deploy AI real time with ESG monitoring itself in the manufacturer itself, all the way to your investment evaluation. How does the life cycle assessment looks like when you benchmark your ESG KPI against it, so they can see your ROI coming from there. So these are all really on the ground when you kind of look at ISSB reporting and you want to bring in the SASB as part and parcel of it, then you kind of see how does that work out for the organization. So remember, I kind of say it's not just compliance, it's about your competitive advantage. And you can bring this into a competitive advantage when you kind of measure your KPIs and you get your ROI. You're going to get 3 to 4 years to build it, and you're going to build branding. You're going to build strong ecosystem. So this is where a lot of organizations do not see that in most aspects. So when Singapore, when we did this itself, while the agencies are trying to push for it, there is still a lot of resistance on the ground because, like I said, most of the Asia business owners, they are almost more towards the next year results, right? So there's a lot of education from there. So if you understand this, then you realize that project level actions roll up to international reports anyway. So like our company sustainability report, you got to demonstrate ESG progress. And when it's successful, then it kind of offer you different models in terms of the adaptation itself. And this is where our education comes in a lot with all the practitioners, because we wanted to ensure that the business owners have to see this in a very, very blunt and upfront way, that basically if you don't do your reporting well in ISSB for Singapore, you are not going to get a lot of support, right? And then you can't demonstrate your ESG progress, you're not going to get a lot of people coming in to invest. So you're in a catch-22 situation, because in order to do your reduction of your footprint, you need to invest into reduction of products itself. So your renewable energy can be a solar, can be a whatever you have, but that's cost for the start. But if you measure it well, you'll see that basically at a certain point, there's a break even. And once you have a break even, that's where you get your returns out. But this is where a lot of organizations, practitioners need to understand how to communicate in that sense. Yeah, so this means to say that, ladies and gentlemen, when you have policy level, institution level, sectoral level, project level, you still need to have continuous loop of feedback every time, just to ensure that there's enough adaptation, improvement, alignment for both internal and external stakeholders. And then this is what has happening on our side in Singapore. We are trying to enable as much communication as possible. But if of course the communication is about cost, and not consider everything, then it's quite challenging itself. That's why I say, while our government does have a lot of strength in this, but they do have a lot of challenges in some aspect, right? Now, what are some of these things that I talk about? And I'm sure you guys are quite familiar with this itself. So this is ISSB that we are all reporting itself. So ISSB is our overall. Let's see this. ISSB is our overall reporting framework that we have, and this is adopted with basically the Europe side. So if you ask us in Singapore, this is going to be our mandatory. In fact, 2024 December, we decided to do this only for two reasons. ISSB is one thing, is very accountable. So you take away a lot of greenwashing, because ISSB needs to sit with your financial reports every single year. So your financial reports tells you how much you spend. So whether is it a profit or loss, it has to be in alignment with your ISSB report of how much you invest or how much you actually gain from there. So these two wants to come together, there's enough to have the variables come together whereby you are not caught with greenwashing. Because in the last couple of years, there's a major aspect of a lot of greenwashing out there. So this is one of the reasons why every of our countries, Singapore, Malaysia, and Philippines, define that this is the way to go. Because you avoid greenwashing. Because people can say a lot of things, but when you want to come do it, you can't track it, then you're wasting. Because some of this framework below doesn't allow you to track very, very, very deeply. So with ISSB itself, that's number one. Number two, it also enables the investors to come in, because the investors can pump in money, and the last thing you want is to caught to be greenwashing itself, right? So if you ask me, that's the main concern. But they also want to say is that where the money goes to. So they want to see every accountability for all your E, the S, and the G KPIs. So your ISSB is able to do that. Now, once that's done, then you have your GRI reporting, right? So GRI is widely used in most of corporate anyway. So before our shift to ISSB framework in 2024 December, we've been using this, and ISSB and GRI is now also quite aligned with ISSB already. So they do have an ISSB KPI framework inside there. So good news is that you can actually use ISSB, and then your GRI sits in very nicely, because you don't have to do double work. So GRI standards focus on definitely focus on your organization impact, across value chain, broad engagement, maturity, and transparency, right? So the latest update that I kind of learned from this GRI this year is that there's a new climate change standard called the GRI 102 2025 that mandates a lot of disclosure of organization climate-related risks itself. They also have whereby all the companies must report using one unified accordance format, replacing tiered kind of reporting itself. So I think the GRIs are trying to make it itself. But more importantly, is they are aligning to the new financial disclosure that's jurisdictional requirement from IFRS, which is basically under ISSB itself, and the ESRS. So ESRS is more towards the European guys. So that's not a protocol, right? So the relevancy of GRI still stays, all right, because when you adopt it, you still have GRI as very credible comparability, and you meet expectation on both the regulators, the stakeholders, and the public itself. So this is where we try to encourage our companies in Singapore, not just ISSB itself, but you can use GRI for your environment, will be great. Then the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board that we have talked about, they actually have two sectors, one called S1, S2. So the ISSB represents most of the physical development in the reporting standard, and they are created to be a baseline for disclosure. All right. So the S1 is more on the general requirement or more organization, because it provides overarching requirement for sustainability-related financial information disclosure. So for Singapore, when we say that by 2027, every organization needs to report your ISSB S1 means to say that we are focusing on the financial information because we don't have any, the climate related risk in terms of our organization, in terms of our country itself. So this becomes our criteria. So they require companies to disclose the material information about sustainability risks, the opportunities that can actually impact them. So this means to say is that they are very, very, very defined in that ways. And this has to be aligned to the industry specific. So they need to refer to the SASB itself. So ISSB, SASB will be working close to close. SASB will give you the different industry standard. There are about 72 different standards that SASB has. So this is quite aligned in terms of that, right? So of course, when you talk about the S1, it also has to be applied alongside with our S2. So at S2, in terms of ISSB or IFRS S2, it's called climate-related disclosure. So this really builds on the TCFD recommendation than anything else. So when they work this itself, basically, they mandates the disclosure of your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 greenhouse gas insight using the GHG protocol, as we all know how to use that. So here they require every organization to report scenario analysis and climate transition planning disclosure. So that includes your industry specific coming from SASB. So when you report your S2, you need to work with TCFD and your SASB, right? So you can see basically there is quite a few challenges, but Malaysia is already taking this on board and it's compliance in next year for reporting ISSB S2. But sorry, my apologies. What did I do? But what happens is at the end of the day, it still needs an organization to appreciate and understand how this works. And the national level, they must understand, or the government level, they must understand why are they implement this. Because the idea of having some of this is really thinking in a long-term perspective, at the same time helping Mother Earth, or helping us to help Mother Earth, right? So this is where the government needs to be very, very clear, right, in terms of that, right? So I'm not going to the others itself because I think these are the two major disclosure that Singapore work with. On the right side, you see a Paris Agreement. All right, a Paris Agreement is where in Singapore we actually have Article 6 that enable us to do international collaboration on emission reduction via carbon credit and non-market approaches. So when we started our carbon credit itself, we were actually working with United Nations to under 6.2 to start our carbon credit itself. All right, COP29 last year under Buku finalizes Article 6, which basically ends the 9-year reduction, which basically now we will be able to move on to 6.4, which is called crediting mechanism, which basically will be launched this year. The focus on environmental integrity, digital registration, and improve MRV. MRV means monitoring, reporting, and verification. So since Singapore is the first to do the 6.2, now we are positioned to be the most appropriate person to go 6.4 because we just gone through most of the challenges and we set up most of it. So this enables us Singapore as to move forward into a national carbon trading hub itself. So our government is actually pushing this very aggressive, and that's the reason why the ISS reporting everything is so compliant. So if you understand this, then basically there's actually a lot of opportunities out there for organizations to tap on, right? So it's all about also whereby under the Article 6 is also about host countries and buyers, right? Whereby we can authorize bilateral trades, whereby along the way you're going to have new framework for credit quality, transparency, and how does it kind of benefits the SDG goals, all right? And then of course, Singapore, when we first did it, we actually had our first agreement with Rana, I think it was the African country, whereby we actually allows all the public listed companies, when they do their reporting, between 2019 to now, they are allowed to have 5% of carbon credit buy off from them, right? And then with the Article 6 that's now moving forward, some of these public listed companies, now they can buy with some of the MOU signed with other countries. For example, our Sembcorp is buying our carbon credit now with Vietnam, because Vietnam has signed with us, and we are buying carbon credit from the REC, called a Renewable Energy Certification, from their wind turbine. So this allows us to do some trading and learn how to work with one another in that buying and selling and investing or trading itself. Because we also signed with Bhutan, because Bhutan is a negative carbon credit, so there's a lot of opportunities coming down. So is Mongolia. And then Malaysia, we just signed this year with Malaysia. So Malaysia will be one of the biggest carbon credit option, because they have a lot of forestry, so we can do a lot of carbon what we call opportunity in terms of carbon avoidance and stuff like that. All right, maybe after the break, I'll share with you what does it mean with Apple Watch advertisement, just for some of the free time stuff, right? So but that gives you a perspective that it's very important. But it all goes back into able to establish to report first. As I always tell all the practitioners and all our stakeholders, please, especially the business owners, please have your reporting well done first. Because if you don't do your reporting well done under ISSB or any of this framework that we see on the screen, you can't do your carbon credit. Because you need to identify footprint, you need to measure footprint, you have to demonstrate you are able to reduce footprint. If you are not able to demonstrate to reduce footprint, you can't do offsetting. Because what we are talking about now in terms of carbon credit is called offsetting. And that's where the Paris Agreement in terms of Article 6 is so important for us. Because Singapore, we don't have any resources. Our resources is capital, in terms of human capital, and our finance. So we are transforming into an international carbon trading and voluntary itself. And Singapore and company must keep pace with this, because this is a very new space that we're all going into, and unfortunately, it's not cast in stone. So that's where our government is going around agreeing with the government level first, so that basically once we are ready, we can actually execute it in the next few years, right? That brings us back into the ASEAN taxonomy. So it's a regional taxonomy itself. It's nice because I think the ASEAN taxonomy version comes along in version 4 of this year, 2025, is to extend the enabling of sectors like tech, science, professional services, and to advance agriculture, manufacturing, water, and waste management, whereby basically everybody is able to understand what is activity for green, activity for amber, activity for red, so that we know how to balance the adaptation itself. It is relevant because at the end it helps us to bridge with one another in the ASEAN side. And in Nepal, you guys are at your own space here. You do have your own little region itself. So it's also something you can actually look at, right? So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, the ESG practitioner must always stay updated, and you realize there's so much to learn, right? So I'm also updating myself. In fact, just a beeline, I'm actually going for our national carbon credit executive program that's offered by the government, and then that's a 3-month course, and then basically just to update, so that basically when we run carbon credit in the next two years, we are ready to go. So like the ISO 14064, the government is telling the whole nation that we need 3,000 14064 in order to do compliance by 2027. So I'm certified with a lead verifier down there, not because I want to be there, but really to help business leaders to establish their requirement to do reporting itself. So carbon credit for our side here in this part of the world is going to be huge. So we need to keep updated, and we need to integrate, because this evolving frameworks that we all talk about has a lot of major implication or implementation, particularly attention to ISSB standard. So ISSB standard is becoming the global baseline for sustainability reporting itself. So if you can converge around ISSB standard and represent a historical opportunity to move from fragmented reporting to a unified global approach, then you find that there's a lot more opportunity, and that's the reason why we are encouraging all our business leaders in Singapore, Malaysia, to get this reporting up, because I need to bring them into China, and in China we actually are bringing them some of these people out there. So we're going to use ISSB as a main common so-called denominator for discussion. So it's not just going to be compliance as a checkbox, right? This reporting itself will be effective enablers, and they are credible, and they are definitely the competitive sustainability strategies that we can work with. And Singapore is using this so that they can position against the global side. So as you move into the next couple of slides, all right, you see how Singapore, right, will be able to report this requirement, and then we move into that size. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring you to the next sector itself, and then we're going to go for a short break, right? So now, Singapore has this thing called our green plan, all right? And our green plan is where, our green plan is where we actually exemplify our environment, social, and governance. It's launched in February 2021. It's our flagship of whole of nation sustainable development blueprint, right? So the plan is to aim to position as a leading green economy, resiliency, and a very regional innovative or innovation hub for sustainability itself. Our ambition is to achieve net zero by 2050, as we agreed with Paris Agreement, with the United Nations, and supporting the commitment to United Nations 2030 itself and the Paris Agreement. So the whole of this national approach is actually a cross-ministerial coordination. So what you see, some of these people here are of different industries. So they have a Ministry of Sustainability and Environment as one. We have the Ministry of Trade and Industry as one. We have our Ministry of Transportation as one. We have a Ministry of National Development as one. We have the Ministry of Education as one. So basically, they're all supported by the entire government business committee. All right. The fiscal commitment is over 10 billion allocated since 2021 to 2030. This is used mainly for the climate change, urban adaptation, and green innovation. This haven't included the carbon taxation we are talking about. This is just the fiscal engagement itself, 10 billion, right? So this major outlays includes like 1 billion for cycling infrastructure we built. So basically, Singapore, you know, very small, Singapore, and very flat, right? So we have actually built a cycling pathway that actually, if you are able to, and you're fit enough, right, you can cycle around Singapore within that day itself. Then you get to see different places of Singapore in that sense. So we actually spent almost $1 billion for that cycling infrastructure. Number one is about sustainability. Number two is about lifestyle and health. And we also spent almost 6 billion for wastewater security at Tuas Nexus. So our Tuas Nexus is one of the biggest wastewater security that we have done, and we are able to sustain our water nationality for about 50%. So basically, if anything, the world has come to a halt or there's major war, we can still survive a little bit. We got 50% in that circular economy side itself. Not that we want to, but yeah, this is something that security is important. So if you understand this, we actually based on 5 pillars. We actually based on city nature, sustainable living, energy resetting, green economy, and resilient future. All right, and these are all quite aligned with the SDG goals of the 17 goals itself. Right, how we're going to do it is it's all about governance, measurement, and engagement. We do have our greengov.sg, where all the ministry report on their own environment performance annually, and sustainability, and it's embedded into government procurement policies. So there's a KPI accountability for the government. So we call it greengov.sg themselves. And then they will have the stakeholder engagement. All right, stakeholder engagement is where they engage with companies, engage with NGOs, they go to schools, they'll try to engage with household. All right, household as in like getting a household to join the movement, so that basically becomes the overall perspective. And that's basically we have our SG Eco funding, and then our school carbon literacy campaign. All right, we have educations from the very young, whereby in Singapore standard, we follow the British, as Nepal does. We actually have this before the kindergarten and primary school. We have the preschool or pre-kindergarten, where the kids are really taught in terms of what is ESG, in terms of Mother Earth and how Mother Earth is beautiful and what they must do to help Mother Earth, all the way to primary school, all the way to secondary, and then colleges itself. So basically, there is a progression for them. But I was sharing with some of the agencies that, you know what, it's quite sad because everybody stopped at polytechnic or college level. They didn't continue this message to adulthood. So as a result, most of our adults, we have other priorities when we graduate. So unless you are very passionate and you are one of the 10% of the global people who are passionate about saving Mother Earth and help the Mother Earth itself, if not 90% of people don't really bother because it doesn't affect them. So this is the only challenging part. So the government is now re-engineering this part whereby it actually goes through the adult itself. So hopefully after one generation, our Singapore citizens are now a little bit more ESG. So basically, these are long-term impact that we are looking at, right? So in terms of performance management, there's a committee of supply session that basically needs to report back to our Ministry of Sustainability, which then reports back to United Nations, right? So this is where our NEA, which is our National Environmental Agency, manages and measure all the footprint we have in Singapore. And every year we report how much are we going to lower down footprint so that we can reach a 36% or 60 million ton lowered of footprint by 2030. And then we move forward to 2035 in that sense. So how does it work? So far is interesting. We have actually done a few physical and live example that we have done. Based on this green plan, we have now have floating solar farm. We have car-like precincts whereby there's a lot of people who prefer walking and cycling. All right. Most of our buildings that's now built is all 80% green. So they hope to have targeted by 20% all the new builds will be super low energy and stuff like that. So basically, these are how we actually integrate our green plans in that sense. So let me share with you basically that perspective of the 5 pillars so that you can understand some of the practicality we put into this space, and then maybe you can actually align that to Nepal itself. So the first one that kind of look at it as a Green Plan 2030 that, as I mentioned, it will actually launched in 2021. Our purpose is to hit emission by 2050 itself. All right. So that basically we are able to lower down the carbon footprint as much as we can, right, according to the United Nations. And this is all the government commitment is backing over $10 billion of it from spending from 2021 to 2030. So they basically kind of sit across the cross-sector transformation. So what are these 5 pillars? These 5 pillars have number 1 to do with city in nature. All right. So the goal of city in nature, ladies and gentlemen, is to transform Singapore into a city in nature by restoring and intensifying our urban greenery. One of the key initiatives and target we actually put is we actually are planting 1 million plants into our Singapore. So far, when we're talking to our stakeholders from National Park, the directors, we already have almost like 4 to 5 million plants in Singapore. But it's not good enough to sequester the carbon dioxide. So we're going to put in another 1 million more plants. All right. And that's number 1. We're going to have another 200 hectares of extra sky-rise greenery. That means on top of the rooftop, we're going to have sky-rise greenery. We will most probably restore about 80 hectares of forest and marine habitats around. So that basically at the end of the day, we can rebuild the above land and below water biodiversity, which is part of parcel of the SDG goals, right? And then we're going to extend our park connectors that we share with you about to total about 500 kilometers, which basically you can access anywhere around by 2030 itself. And by 2030 itself, which means by 2030 itself, every household can have a 10-minute walk to a park or from a park itself. So basically, that's how we're going to regreen Singapore as much as we can. All right. And one of few of our so-called neighborhood that we have, and in Singapore, you know that we are very structured in our neighborhood, very militarized kind of well structured area, right? So we have one of the place called how should I put it? It's like you're able to link from one neighborhood to the next neighborhood, in a closest description. Then you will see biodiversity enhancement as you walk, and you have a lot of cooling because of the track that we built with all the trees and all the stuff like that. So basically, this is what our government is. It's a balancing on lifestyle, if you can use the word. The second one is basically about sustainable living. This is to cultivate green habits and resource efficiency among Singaporeans. Number one, we want to reduce household water consumption to about 130 liters per person per day by 2030 itself. So because we do have the way we can use IoT and AI to measure it, so we actually are able to measure how to lower it down. We are still not there yet, trust me. But because there's a lot of education on the household first, right, than anything else. Excuse me. So we are making progression in that sense, right? So we want to aim to have a reduction of 30% waste sent to the landfill by 2030. And this is backed by our own national zero waste master plan and a national recycle initiative. Singapore, unfortunately, we are a very small country, but we have a major wastage of food. We have about 800,000 tons of food wasted every year. So I think that's a call. That's a call for alarm, right? But it's not about anything else. So the wastage of food doesn't come from just the household itself, but it's every aspect of hotel, restaurants, F&B, and all that. We have that so much. So I think Singaporeans need to be educated in that sense, because a lot of people are starving and they have no food the rest of the world. So I think we are living a very privileged, Singapore living in a very privileged country, but I think we should not take for granted. Personally, I think that's my agenda, trying to get these people to understand that, if you can't finish, first of all, don't order so much. Order what you need is enough. In fact, scientifically, if you eat 70% filled or your stomach, you are good enough, right? So yeah, that's a different agenda. So example of what we have, let's share with you earlier on in terms of sustainable living. Our new water program, the water that we have recycled, we can supply about 50% of our water needs of a national level. So basically, that's what I mean by sustainable living, right? Energy reset that we've done in Singapore is we have shifted our energy mix to cleaner source. We have quadrupled our solar deployment for the last few years for at least 2 gigawatt peak installed by 2030. That is basically, with a solar panel, we are able to have enough power to power up 350,000 households in Singapore. Still not enough, but we will do what we can. We will import up to 4 gigawatts of low carbon electricity by 2035, which is 30% of our national supply. And we'll ramp up our deployment of EV and charging points. So remember, I said by 2035, every car in Singapore is going to be EV, so they need to have extra charging points. So we're going to mandate all the new cars registration to be cleaner by then. And we'll have a charging points about nationally about 60,000. So you can see basically there's a lot of aggressive numbers putting up itself. So it's not just getting into the agreement with United Nations that we're going to lower down 36% globally and 36% national carbon footprint with 60 million tons, but we are putting all into a very clear KPIs on a national level, and then they got to lower it down. Right. Because of this push and heavy stressed, there needs to come innovation, and then that's where I think, being human, we have the ability to do that, because we are not AI, right, guys? I mean, AI is all about ones and zeros. AI is very good in terms of understanding the data and how to dissect and how to get the big data into more analytics for all of us. But at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, you and I know that basically at the end of the day, AI is AI. So when we come to the push and shove, all right, we can use what we have, which AI doesn't have, called imagination and creativity. And hence, one of our company in Singapore has able to do that internal innovation. So in order to support and to exemplify what the government wants in terms of supplying to 350,000 households in terms of solar, we have actually built a floating solar farm in Tengah Reservoir. It's one of the small reservoir we have, and we are the Southeast Asia largest battery storage in Jurong Island itself. So we have these two things happening itself. The Tengah floating solar farm in Tengah Reservoir, that farm itself we are now testing now, can actually run 19,000 homes, all right, without disruption, all right. And the one in the largest battery storage, the CCUS in Jurong, is our biggest in this part of the world, right? So we are pushing in that sense. So a lot of innovative things are coming through. So basically, this is where I think it gets interesting, right? The fourth one is green economy, and green economy is interesting because it kind of makes sustainability a competitive advantage for companies, and it create green jobs itself. So we do have a nationwide core enterprise sustainability program that we help companies to decarbonize. That means we actually help them to find ways to lower down the carbon footprint. So this is an expansion of the green financing that we have, which basically now we have our green bonds, and we have our Singapore Asia taxonomy inside, our enterprise social program, subsidized training, green financing, and we put standard down. So we are now nurturing about 3 trillion carbon services and trading hub by leveraging of this regional finance. So Singapore is really building up. So we is about 3 trillion, T as in T, not the B, 3 trillion carbon services and trading hub by next couple of years. So this expansion of green financing, carbon services, innovation helps to get a lot more sustainability linked jobs and business opportunities out there, because we want to aspire to be a carbon service trading hub for Asia. And we will be, because we are now already working on 6.4, and there's one more with 6.8 itself. So with United Nations support, we will be now able to trade for the whole of this part of the world, whereby Singapore has already signed agreement with Southeast Asia, with Bhutan, with Mongolia. Then we are crossing to Africa and then South America. Because at the end of the day, our trading hub will be trading straight with Euro Union, EU, ETS. Because Euro Union, EU, ETS, they are holding 97% of the overall carbon trading, and they are trading about I was told about, it's actually trillions per month in that sense itself. So there's a lot that we can actually move forward with. That's provided nothing major happens across the world in that sense, right? So these are some opportunities in that space of green economy. Because at the end of the day, the last one that Singapore has is called Resilient Future, because we need to build a urban and economic resilience to climate impact. I mean, whether we like it or not, for us in Singapore, we are surrounded by sea, right? So we're going to have a rising sea level. We're going to have extreme weather, which actually we are facing now anyway. We're going to have major resource stresses anyway. So we will be putting up a coastal protection effort, right? We're going to have advanced flood management and protective infrastructure out there, whereby basically now we are protecting our East Coast, whereby we're going to build our famous East Coast Marine Parade and all with a high wall. So they basically going to protect it like what the Japanese are doing. We're going to have urban heat island implication. We have shaded pathway, high albedo services, green roof, vertical planting, just to make sure that we lower down the footprint. Because every tree that we plant, all right, you actually have about -1 or 2 degrees when you're under the tree. But more importantly, every tree you have, when it's matured, about 5 to 10 years, the tree can sequester about 22 kg of carbon dioxide every year. So this is where the government is exploring in that sense. So the other example is where we have this 30 by 30. It's actually our food security strategy, where we aim to have 30% of the nutrient needs by our climate resilient agriculture tech, whereby we're going to grow our own food supply using agriculture tech. And it sounds undoable, but the Chinese and the Americans have already done it. They actually have planting, and they are rearing pigs and everybody in a vertical building itself. And it's all run by AI and robotics itself. So it's actually very, very doable. All right. So now it's a question of where are we? So there's a massive investment in this aspect, and a massive investment on coastal protection, massive investment of enabling this, so that basically we can support in that sense, right? So that's our 5 pillars itself. Now I'm going to bring you guys into the next one, which is called our government commitment itself, because at the end of the day, there is a major commitment of spending the 10 million. It's not because it's a number come from there, but our government basically have an estimation that they need to work across that. There's no right or wrong aspect of it, but ladies and gentlemen, the ministry needs to come together, and there must be enough coordination that there must be an overall impact for the national level, right? So our NE has what it takes to run it up. So that at the end of the day, it kind of runs in that level. So I'm not going through that space because I can't share with you that space. So at the end of the day, it's ready to hit a net zero emission by 2050. And we do have our 2035 plan that we're going to have another 45 million tons of CO2 to be down, right? So that basically we are demonstrating, we are supporting the decarbonization on a global level. So the key levels or levers that we actually work with for 2035 plan is really to have the industrial energy efficiency. We're going to bring in, because Singapore depends a lot of fossil fuel, natural gas, in terms of our burning of energy, burning of the fossil fuel for energy itself. By 2035, we're going to inject hydrogen into that, so we're going to lower that by 50%. So in that sense, we are looking at how to enable that green energy come in. All right, we still depend on our large solar. We're going to have hydrogen coming in. We have a carbon capture. We also going to have importing low carbon energy. And of course, Singapore, we are now looking at our ability to do fusion nuclear itself. So the fusion nuclear is, although is still a hot topic, but at the end of the day, a fusion nuclear is not a nuclear reactor at the back of the backyard, but it's basically it can power a lot of opportunity in that sense. As to EV itself, my challenge to everybody is how do you dispose of fusion nuclear, right? So that's where the next few generations need to think about it, right? So, but that's something we need to have always in discussion. So how are we getting there? So we actually innovating waste to energy. We are e-wasting, recycling. We are doing food waste reduction. We are investing in smart grids. We're putting up battery storage across. We are emerging a lot of green tech, from hydrogen to nuclear, as I mentioned. We have about another 5 billion top up to the Future Energy Fund. That includes your hydrogen and your nuclear. We have about 100 executives and staff already trained in our university for nuclear. So we are ready to go. But more importantly is international partnership. Because if there's no international partnership, it's going to be very, very challenging. So we're international partnership for green energy imports. We have cross-border carbon capture. We are using Article 6 from the United Nations to do carbon credit internationally. So if you see that's an opportunity, then you realize that that's how we can actually enable many perspectives itself, right? And then our competitive is more towards having an inclusive sustainability model, right? In Singapore, we do have our government giving us grants, training schemes, standards to ensure that every sector can participate. It is not well spread, if you ask me, but at least some of the sectors do have some of the grants and training schemes to support it itself. So for me, most of my training for practitioners, they are supported with some funds. All right. For me in Malaysia, I'm also in Malaysia, so I also do training in Malaysia. So I'm actually with the Malaysian government, so I can see the Malaysian government also supporting with some funds itself. So the government is trying to enable that at the end of the day, so that the organization and workforce understand how to enable ESG. So in closing, right, yes and gentlemen, our Singapore Policy Green Plan is more than just a policy, right? It's a call to every ministry that we have, every business that we we all have in Singapore, and also most important, every citizen to play their part. Because the integrated plan, while our agency NEA is a pivotal role in terms of carbon footprint, it is also a critical for the footprint or the lower down of carbon footprint as a robust investment signal for country to come in. That basically we are ready for the future ready, economic competitive as a leader itself. So if you understand this aspect, then you realize that we are able to move forward. So this is just only one aspect of the practicality itself, ladies and gentlemen. All right. I do have a few more slides. All right. But I'm just thinking in terms of time, because there's a carbon credit and everything. Can I stop share here for a while? So, Sunita, you think is good for them to go for a break? It might be a bit too long.
It's 9 here, Stervey. We can take 5 minutes break
Yeah.
just for people to catch a coffee or drinks,
Yeah.
and then we can come back because we only have around 25 minutes to wrap up.
Okay.
What do you think?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
I can run that up, and then in the 25 minutes we'll finish the carbon. I think the carbon pricing will be very critical for Nepal to understand itself. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. So, the session is for 2 hours, so we'll take quick 5 minutes break and we'll come back then.
Okay. Cool. I'll see everybody back in 5 minutes. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
I think Arya has a hands raised. Is it?
Arya, if you have anything, if it's a question, then you can ask once the session is done. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Okay. Cool. I'll see everybody back later. All right. Thank you. All right, so it's back. Yep. So I'm going to try something. I'm not too sure whether it works. So basically, I thought maybe I'll share a short video about Apple Carbon Neutral Watch, because that will be you separately to our carbon taxation that you talk about and everything. I'm going to test out, see whether you guys can listen to the to the voice itself. Yeah. So then from there we'll continue with the sharing. Can? All right. So let me share this. Getting Apple out. So just came a while. Let me just switch sides to my presentation. Yeah. Just give me a minute. Okay. So while while this whole sorry, just give me a minute. All right. Just let me share a screen here for a while. Okay. So we're back with the screen itself. So I wanted to kind of share with you this whole Apple, not because I'm an Apple fan. Anyway, I'm a user Samsung, anything else. But what Apple has done in this ad was they actually had demonstrated very clearly to all of us why reporting is important, and they come in terms of number one, internally identifying what they need to report. That's basically all coming under the framework called ISSB. And then we have the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, and they actually demonstrate to you how they manage scope 3 in terms of the suppliers, in terms of the transportation, and everything goes into the report itself. And honestly, Apple doesn't make the whole thing carbon neutral. It means the whole product is carbon neutral. It means there's no carbon, so-called no carbon measurement to that, based on the maturity itself. So they need to take on 30% of carbon offset or carbon credit or carbon project out there, whereby basically it becomes something they can use in the reporting to become a carbon neutral for the product itself. So what it means is when an organization sees that I can do reporting itself and I have an opportunity to offset it. When I offset it, I can bring in carbon neutral product, carbon neutral branding, and that gives a lot of opportunity and credibility to either the company or to the product itself. It is not done. Apple didn't do this in the last 5 years, ladies and gentlemen. My friend Apple was telling me they've been doing this for like almost 15 years. It was a very, 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 very long journey. It was very, 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 very painful journey. But Apple stuck to it. There was a commitment that says that I think there must be something for us that we can do, and we will have to bite the bullet and go for it. And unfortunately, most of the leaders around the world, they are seeing they want to do it, but they have no visibility to see where it is. So my question to every of the business leaders and every of the leaders around is that when Apple did this, have they actually know where they actually can come and they actually can get a carbon neutral watch as of 2025 today? No, right? They were just trying and they were doing what they can, and all for the better of reducing carbon footprint. So carbon footprint becomes very interesting when everybody understands there's a commitment to that. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, because the whole of this morning, I spent a lot of time to talk about where Singapore is in terms of carbon reporting and everything, but that's only just one aspect of it. In terms of delivering the whole thing in an overall sweep, it's actually we need to talk about carbon pricing itself. And this is really our cornerstone for our national sustainability journey. Because when you have a carbon taxation, all right, and this is the first in Southeast Asia, right? Singapore did it to it. We actually want to achieve net zero by 2050. So when we introduced in 2019 itself, it actually has an intentional escalating pathway to ensure that when we brew this up, there's a lasting behavior structural change, both in the industry, organization, and society itself. As a result, Singapore didn't start with what Malaysia is starting next year is 36 ringgit for per ton. We only started with $5 per ton. So it's regardless of the amount, but there's an implementation of process. So it was started $5 from 2019 to 2030, right? We see that's allowing all the big organizations that has a highest carbon footprint to reduce, that's 20,000 tons and above, which basically are all the power generations, the oil and gas, the petroleum, the manufacturing. They need to start to lower down as much as they can. So we were deliberately transitional at this last year. 2024, we increased to $25. And then we're going to set it at 45 by 2627, and by 2030 it's going to be 50 to 80, so to speak. But based on where we are seeing the government is pushing for compliance reporting by 2027, we will separate it's going to be 80 to 100. Excuse me. So this is going to be a major progressive signal for decarbonization for Asia itself. And it's important because this carbon tax covers almost 70% of our country direct greenhouse gas emission. So we're going to target that across the 50 manufacturing facilities, manufacturing power gas, waterways, and everything. And we're going to impact that so that we can cover, now we can cover almost like 80 to 90%. So what happened to this revenue that we have? This basically, the recycled fund goes into what we call grants, into the industrial energy efficiency, goes into investment into R&D and low carbon technology, goes into the financial support for vulnerable household, goes into so that basically kind of ensure that the whole overall cost is being accelerated and not hindered when we do this kind of thing. So if you look at this aspect, at the end of the day, there's a need for us to implement a little bit more flexibility, because I think last year we actually implemented international carbon credit framework, which allows I'll call it eligible facility to set up or offset 5% of the taxation itself, for 5% to offset their overall reporting of their ISS reporting, so that basically you have actually able to minus off itself. So this is where we first started last year to test how to do carbon credit. And this took a long while because we took some years to set it up and to make sure that it has to be compliant, it has to be trustworthy, it has to be regulatory in that sense. So the trajectory of our carbon taxation is actually very deliberate by our government. It's to encourage early adaptation, early action. It rewards investment into low carbon solutions, and it provides industry certainty, I would say, needed for strategic planning and capital reallocation. Because you want to get some investments coming into the organization, coming into the country itself. There needs to be an integrated approach whereby it can be transparent, forward-looking, internationally aligned, and it keeps us running itself. So in short, basically, this is how basically we kind of run in that sense. So in order to run this, all right, we actually use this thing called Article 6, which I kind of briefly share with you how we run it. So what happens is Article 6 enables us to work with different countries. We now signed 7 implemented agreements with key countries like Papua New Guinea, Ghana in last year, May 2024, Bhutan, Peru, Chile, and Rwanda, and recently Paraguay. So these are all confirmed in terms of our implementation agreement. This agreement represents diplomatic documents. So it's not just about private collaboration, but it's on a country level. So they form our backbone for Singapore carbon diplomacy strategy itself, right? So what makes this very important is this agreement strategy important is each of this implementation agreement establish a bilateral collaboration in a very highly integrity carbon credit trading under Article 6.4 under Paris Agreement. So this whole thing works into the United Nations. And this framework enables us, Singapore, to assess international mitigation outcome. So basically, this is to ensure that there's enough environmental integrity through corresponding adjustment, and we don't want to have double counting and compliance itself. So there are 2 critical mandatory provisions to kind of let Singapore to go into it. First of all, it's a 5% share of pre-existing adaptation. This to say is that every implementation, there must be equivalent of 5% authorized carbon credit towards the climate adaptation of the host country. So basically, it's not just a financial transaction, ladies and gentlemen, where we started this. It's actually a climate diplomacy in action, because the fund supports the critical adaptation of infrastructure like coastal protection in Ghana, heat resistance in Rwanda, in climate resistant and agriculture in Paraguay. So when we did this, it's actually not meant for internal or organization or government benefit. It is supposed to help the development of the organization itself. Secondly, is in this international agreement, there's a 2% mandatory cancellation overall global mitigation. This is basically to authorize all carbon credit to be permanently cancelled. That means they do not allow you to have this thing double counting. Then this credit cannot be sold, traded, or counted to the country that has already done that. So this is some of the things that we are actually putting in place in this, and we are the first to run this up from this part of the world. So that basically we will set the protocol and standard for every part of this part of the world to kind of adhere with. So we will become the international training or trading hub itself for this part of the region. So the strategic intention and importance for Singapore is really to enable to be very clear about why Article 6 is a net zero ambition, because it's an alternative energy disadvantage advantage for us to work with. And it provides us three very strategic positioning. One is cost-effective decarbonization. Secondly is position as carbon services and trading hub. And thirdly, to enable us to be climate diplomacy in that sense, right? But at the same time, it also gives us economic and development impact, because it extended beyond that. Article 6 partnership channeling significant climate finance to all the developing countries itself. So Ghana saw this itself, and the rest of countries are seeing itself in this sense. And as of 2027, we actually started our carbon market alliance, and this is the first platform that we actually bring this carbon credits out. Every country have their own, and I think that's great. So it's how we want to enable this itself, right? Now, the Article 6 actually expanded to this aspect itself. So if you see where we are, we have basically almost the one in blue are the one we actually signed in a memorandum of understanding. So basically, Philippines, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, Mongolia, Morocco, and all this we already with MOU with us. So basically, we can do an exchange knowledge of that. We have implemented agreement with the green ones, all right, and then with substantive conclusion. That means Vietnam is already concluded, Paraguay is already concluded. So we actually all this supposed to turn into green, right? So we only left some of the blue as the MOU to start the work with. So Malaysia already started working with us to enable us to kind of look at it in that sense. So this kind of enablement is helping us to look at opportunity to move forward. There will be, as I mentioned, opportunity where 5% mandatory proceed goes to adaptation, 2% for cancellation. There's almost a 1.6 to 5.8, 1.8 to 5.6 billion cancellation of global mitigation projection economic value by 2050. So means to say that there's a lot of opportunities for everybody to work with, and we're going to see most probably a lot of organizations are coming up with carbon services across this part of the world, creating a value at the end of the day. So these are some of the approach that, if you understand, when you have a organization can do reporting based on that confirmed framework, with the framework itself, you can use this as an offsetting. There's actually a lot more opportunity in the long-term branding and competitive advantage. And that's the reason why when we first started off this morning, I would say that, at the end of the day, there is no such thing as compliance itself. It is important to go confidence and compliance, but it's about competitive strategy. It's about have a competitive advantage in that sense, right? Let me finish a couple of slides before you go for a quick Q&A. So at the end of the day, it's all about getting ourselves into financial sectors. Singapore, we have our SGX as the one that's mandatory for it. So we actually use our financial sectors to deliver some of this ESG perspective to that. And that's important because at the end, SGX being the main deliverable itself, they should be making the so-called strategic engagement itself. Then the Monetary Authority of Singapore, all right, is the one who gives the financial green finance leadership. That basically this is the way we can work at, and they actually based on 4 strategic pillars. They based on your data definition, disclosure of how you can run it. They look at the climate resilient financial sectors. They look at the credible transition plans that we have, and then what are some of green transition solutions. So these are some of the pillars our government, in terms of the financial aspect, they are looking at itself. So that basically when they put into the climate risk reporting, that becomes important. So we do have a climate risk reporting requirement in 2025 that basically ACRA is asking SGS to work. So that's the reason why this year, all right, ACRA says that they are having a training for every single company, business owner and director to go for understanding how to do ISSB reporting. They may not be implementing the reporting compulsory yet, but in terms of compliance, but they are encouraging every single business owners in Singapore to do that. So once Singapore have that decree, that Mr. says they will be changing, they'll be pushing down that reporting itself. So this is enabling a lot of organization to learn how to make that change. And then we have updated our green bonds framework on the last slide, right? Our last point. And we want to become the sovereignty of the green bonds framework to set the gold standard for the region, because Singapore is also well established as a financial hub. So we want to ensure that this is bring up to the next level. So if you ask me, the success factor that basically Singapore has is these are a few success factors. I think leadership in the long term is critical. Basically, our climate leadership stands from the unwavering political commitment to the highest level. And that's where you see all the different departments are coming together to see what we need to do. Secondly, is a long-term vision. That we actually look at it from 2030 to 2025 or 2050, but we put it into a very intermediate targets, into a very KPIs that not only the ministry, but it has to flow it down to the organization and to the workforce itself. And then the policy consistency and predictability itself. So we want to make it very consistent. And in order to be consistent, our carbon taxation is the way where is the framework that you cannot be too off, because it has to be consistent for taxation, right? So this is where business plan, investment, and transition goes with confidence. So this is definitely one. The second one we did is institution coordination mechanism. We actually work with our National Climate Change Secretariat here. We do have different secretary we work with, so that basically under certain guidance of the leadership, we can actually deliver some of the requirement. Third one will be basically a market-based instrument. That's where I share with you the carbon taxation, the carbon pricing, our green finance initiative. This is where we operate as our first carbon taxation in Singapore, in this South Asia. We cover about almost 80% of our total emission through direct tax, right? So that basically we balance that off. So that basically we can actually move now into an international carbon market integration called the carbon credit trading. But that we work with Article 6 under the Paris Agreement. So we actually have internalization, but we also look at externalization itself. So we can balance that so that we can come with our green finance internal ecosystem, that we can run it internally itself. When it's all done, then we look at the fourth point, which is called the international collaboration, which basically is important because the strategic partnership is where there is requirement from a financial aspect. So while a lot of us are looking at ESG as an environmental impact, which I totally agree, but from a government perspective, it is a financial impact. So as a result, we have to look at it in terms on we actually came up with this thing called FASP, Financing Asia Transition Partnership. So the FASP represents Singapore as a flagship international collaboration initiative, whereby we are committed to about 500 million in concessional funding to a dollar to match with partners to give that. Our target is to have 5 billion in total mobilization of ASEAN decarbonization project. So this is all rolling out in that sense. So basically we are looking at bilateral partnership in that sense. So the recent development with this, we actually work with UK. We UK collaboration with 70 million pledged into the British investment in international. Basically that's helping us with that. Articles partnership is over 20 countries. That's we actually put into that. We have a sustainability action plan. We are putting into that itself. So we are putting some of this in terms of enabling this in the long term itself, right? Of course, the last part is a regulatory framework. Basically, at the end of the day, is to support business transition assistance, right? So because nothing works if the government just say and the people cannot react. So recognizing a challenge that you have this emission transition. So we actually face with the emission intensive trade exposed sectors. So we actually introduction some of the framework to help organizations to transit all right, across the emission itself. So this is where the government is putting it. And then the last portion will be private sector engagement, whereby incentive and capacity building is very important, ladies and gentlemen. To me, at the end of the day, the government can do a lot of stuff, right? But industrial collaboration and co-creation is, I think, where we all should all come from. Because Singapore approaches the emphasis of partnership rather than purely regulatory compliance, because what they did is they actually did a lot of consultation. They get a lot of extensive stakeholder engagement from all the different framework people. So they basically understand how to run it up. So that's where it is. But we also target at innovation itself, right? So they basically at the end of the day, they want to enable organizations internally to build that support of green economy, green opportunity out there. But at the end of the day, it's about capacity building. So the requirement from the education space becomes very, very huge. And this is a long road ahead. But nonetheless, it's about commitment. It's about enabling us in terms of understanding our passion, understanding our purpose. And then if it's even a long road, I think at the end of the day, if we can do what we can and we can make a little difference in a little space here, we only have 80 years when Mother has been around for billions of years. That 80 years, if you can make a little bit impact, I think if everybody can follow through a little impact, we do have a long-term impact at the end of the day. So, in conclusion, yeah, I would say that these 6 factors that we have is actually a concerted effort that I've shared with you for the last 2 hours that created us Singapore as a distinctive climate governance model. All right. Our approach demonstrates as a small little country, small state, we can lead by example through smart policy design, strong institution, and strategic partnership itself. So as we kind of move forward, right? Singapore is its model continues to evolve. We will continue to evolve because this is not cast in stone. Our 2035 NDC commitment to 50 million tons of CO2 is very ambitious and realistic. But we also acknowledge there's a lot of challenges out there. But I believe that our model will prove to be effective. If let's say the action climate needs to be implemented, and it doesn't come from a political will, but a very comprehensive ecosystem of institutions, incentives, partnership. Right? We all have to start working together with a very same goals somewhere, right? And with the British College, I think the British College is a good start to start that itself, because the integrated approach needs to come from somewhere. And that means for us, our integrated approach positions Singapore not as a leader, but also as a global reference for the global itself. And I think with the British College itself, when everybody is coming together and everybody has the same mindset and same goal, I think that's a way to kind of move forward. All right. So basically, that's the end of that for Singapore. I do have others, but I think I'm taking too much time. I'm supposed to talk about the Nepal opportunities in that, but maybe some other time. All right. So, yep. I'm going to pass this back to Sunita for question and answer.
Thank you so much, Stervey. Thank you so much. I cannot thank you enough for the amount of information and insights that you've shared with us. From the lens of Singapore, especially with their own national priorities. I'm not sure about other participant, but I personally had no idea about the active and intentional national agenda of incorporating ESG in from the institutional level in Singapore. Thank you so much for sharing that. I have like almost 3-4 pages of notes just to search more and study more. So please don't be surprised if I get back to you with lots of questions.
Pleasure is mine. Pleasure is mine.
Yeah, and if I just have to, I know we're running out of time, but if I just have to quickly give you one couple of pointer about ESG landscape in Nepal. Last time when I had a chat with you, I told you about that ESG seems to be a quite a popular framework, especially in banking and finance sector here, which is actually led by a Central Bank of Nepal with their guidelines of environmental and social policy that they launched in 2018, followed by green finance taxonomy that they launched recently. So BFI sectors are quite active in integrating ESG in their practices. I believe we are still at the beginning phase about this integration and the whole understanding of sustainability. There's a lot to learn, and I also believe that we haven't really yet figured out the ways to integrate our practice with the national priorities because we're not really clear on that. From if I have to speak on behalf of the industry and academics. In fact, academic is even behind in all the integration in the curriculum. So that is my understanding about the landscape. There are a couple of reports. One is by World Bank and one is by Invest for Impact Nepal about the current ESG status. I will share that with you and with the participants as well. Hopefully the report will have additional insights about the Nepal status. And this also means that we are going to have another session with you to talk more about this in future.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier on, I did prepare kind of like a session about Nepal landscape and opportunities in terms of the climate and ESG space and the framework and my perspective of what are some of the strategic recommendations that Nepal could move forward with. But this is from my perspective, so it has nothing to do from the government.
For sure. Would love to talk more about a follow-up session on that as we progress. Stervey, thank you so much. We will spend 5 minutes more just to take questions from audience. I see some of them have left because I understand people are working and they have to be there by 9:30, so that's totally understandable. Those of us who are here, I'm just going to give them an opportunity and be here around for 5 minutes. So I'll start with Arya because Arya raised hand at the very beginning.
Yes.
So Arya, over to you.
Yes, Ariel. Hi.
Hi, Stervey. Thank you so much for your very insightful session.
Thank you.
Oh, my question to you is, firstly, I've been studying green taxonomy of a lot of countries and regional taxonomy as well. And one thing that I've realized is very few of them are mandatory and they don't have any incentives either. So when thinking from a private sector perspective, not denying that their number one purpose is to earn profit, how can you attract private sectors when you do not have any incentives, number one? And number two, if it's not mandatory, why would they go an extra length to comply with something?
Absolutely.
Even European taxonomy, this is also not mandatory from what I've read so far. I think it only encourages to disclose the report, but I don't think the word disclose would actually translate to mandatory. And they don't have any incentives either. So it's quite surprising, and I would like to know more about how is this working.
Well, Ariel, I think you have actually pointed out the most important word is really marketing. So, the only thing that drives reporting in any organization is always from the government and the requirement to do reporting to move forward. So in Singapore, while we do have our green taxonomy for the ASEAN level, you realize that this is just to enable us to understand just the space where we're playing and what is expectation from there. But in terms of in country itself, Malaysia, Singapore, and Philippines, we are all required to do our compliance reporting every single year. So in that sense, they have really so-called no choice but to kind of execute that in that sense. So my take will be basically, while the green taxonomy is good to have, but I will always encourage SMEs and business leaders and business owners to really look at where the government is bringing down the framework, where basically that framework becomes critical in terms of how is this going to be deployed and what is supposed to be reported in that sense. I'll give an example, right? In Singapore, we have to report our ISSB reporting. Excuse me. But then in terms of the focus, we are looking at basically the S1, which is basically the general requirement. But in Malaysia, they are also using ISSB reporting, but their main criteria will be first S2. So if you see at the end of the day, every country has based on their different culture and setting, everything, that the reporting becomes important. But because we are all on ISSB, so we kind of know how to communicate with one another, what is required, and how do we manage that. So that taxonomy will come out as a lot of. I would think, honestly, I would think that green taxonomy is just like your Wikipedia. Yeah, encyclopedia kind of stuff, where people get to see what it is and understand, oh, Singapore has this, or Malaysia has this, or Europe has this, or Nepal has this. So what does it mean in that sense? But there is the disclosure, like you say, has to come from a top down from the government itself. I hope that gives you a perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. One more follow-up question. So does this mean, like globally, we all are in a stage where we're only maybe experimenting how all of this work? So now it's not really mandatory. We're still exploring if the that green taxonomy or sustainable taxonomy works or not. Is that the case?
Yes. If you ask me, it is. I won't say it's experimenting, but I would say it is evolving. Because yeah, you need to put into a space, and in that space, I'll call it a book of knowledge. That space needs to evolve, right? So Europe has that, ASEAN has this. I think, if not mistaken, you guys will have one in South Asia, and every one of us will need to evolve. And when we look at this in the long run, what does it mean in that? Because evolution will change quite a thing as we evolve ourselves. So I would think as more of evolving more than anything else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
No, pleasure's mine.
All right.
Is there time to ask another question?
Yeah, sure, you sure.
Short question.
Yeah. So, like when it comes to this ISSB standards, there are like governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, right? So then when we say it from like our perspective, like Nepal's perspective, we don't have a standard. So then I'm asking this question. I'm asking it because do you think that it is very strategic to modify it according to the minimum sustainability requirements? Because I mean, for ISSP standards, it's complicated from where I see it, because it's not that Nepal does not have rules and regulations regarding it, but it is very specific to the risk mitigation and not the sustainability related risk and opportunity as it says by ISSB standards. So what do you think? It's yeah. So I just want to know your perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will bring it back to the idea of why are we reporting to certain framework itself, right? So if I want to report ISSB, basically I'm not from ISSB anyway, right? So but I think it's important because I just need to correlate myself with the rest of the other countries who's reporting that in the ISSB framework. So in the ISSB framework, although it may sound complicated because there are a lot of KPIs you need to look at and a lot of questions you need to follow, that doesn't mean as an organization or as an agency, you need to execute as per what it is. You can basically take some of the requirement because your reporting on ISSB has to feed back to your financial report of the year of the company itself. So this is the only purpose of that correlation for ISSB. That's the reason why risk mitigation and assurance has to come in that sense. But this is also for people or for organizations, for investors to invest into the organization or invest into the country. Because everybody who wants to invest into the country must have understanding what's your assurance, what's the risk, isn't it? So it depends on where the organization is coming from. If they felt that they're comfortable and they don't need to look externally for external investment, then it's fine. But I think as an overall perspective, that's where the ISSB comes in. That's why I say ISSB is just really meant for the investment perspective. And you're right. Basically, it is really in that sense it's a little complicated, but. Because when we look at ISO 14064 with ISSB, it is not if you kind of know how to pull out the right KPIs. Now, in Singapore and in most of the countries, what we recommend that while you have ISSB reporting just for the risk factor, and you need to report your environmental or your governance or your social part, you can still use your TCFDN or you can TFCD, or you can use your GRI to demonstrate that you actually are meeting the KPIs accordingly. So in Singapore, we have a lot of organizations who are using ISSB as a reporting, but they also overlay it with GRI itself. And hence you see internationally, GRI now they're aligning themselves with ISSB. Whereas TSFD is already aligned with ISSB. So everything is just falling back into IFRS itself. So if this is the world movement or the global movement itself, then and on an organization level, on a national level, it is really up to the government to decide where it is to sit themselves in. There's no right, no wrong. Yeah, I mean, it's like what for another example, right? China, right, has their own standard, and China's standard is definitely higher than many of us, right? Because we've seen China's standard, we were like, shit, they are behavior, they know, but they're putting their standard across to ISSB again. So the question is why? So they think about the potential of the strategic thinking and the competitive advantage in the next 5 to 10 years. I think this is where we need to open up a little space in terms of that, thinking. Does it make sense, Yusha?
Yep, totally. Thank you so much. And also, I mean, I know we are running out of time, but then in Singapore, which framework do we use for carbon calculation? Is it GHG protocol or like? Yeah, GHG.
Yep.
Perfect.
GHG.
Yeah.
Yes. GHG will be the main protocol because we are using ISO 14064. So 14064 to verify and validate is GHG protocol. Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yusha. Pleasure.
All right. I know, one thing we've realized, Stervey, in this course, Sustainability Literacy from past week, is it's just not enough. The time is just not enough to talk because we have so many things to discuss and to question. And the conversation continues. So with that, I would like to thank you again so much on behalf of all of British College and the participants, Stervey. I will continue the conversation with you about our future plan, and I hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.
Okay, so then thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend ahead, and God bless everybody. All right.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Take care. Cheers.
Sunita ma'am.
Yes, sir.
I mean,